let's dive into the Doge dataset.
Yes.
So, as somebody catches fraud for a living, is Elon right that fraud is super easy to identify?
Wait, were you part of the Doge thing? Like, explain to me what the
Yeah.
context is for Doge.
So Doge is, in our world, what everyone understands Doge. It was the government trying to find ways to get efficiency and using technology. I have to say, initially, the idea of Doge using technology in a lot of these spaces is actually important because you can actually, these are companies that are very big that are dealing with millions of data sets. So having artificial intelligence, AI, companies building platforms to capture value there is really important. Now, the Doge data set in our world that was released in healthcare was one of the largest healthcare data released by the government. So we have to give credit where credit is due. That is really important. That data set has advantages to a lot of people in my ecosystem. So it was a provider centered data. So you have to think about the provider. When I say provider, I'm talking about a doctor, pharmacist, your dentist. It's information around those particular people. It's so rich if you are trying to sell into those networks. So I've seen a lot of people who have benefited from that, but it also shines, a spotlight on where the other services are. So the Doge data set, 80,000 feet, it's good. But as you really try to stick the landing, you start to realize that that data doesn't give you enough information for you to fit into the solutions that we talked about earlier on. Can you fit into pre-care? Just looking at the provider? No, you need to understand the patient. You need that claim level patient data so that you can say to the insurance company, this particular doctor has or a provider has a very flaring, blinking red light of like, this is really outlier behavior. But then how do you drill down to actually recover the dollar? So you need that independent, so that's where we come in, which is you can do statistical analysis, but there's logistical, there's clinical analysis that can yield you to actually pull down the dollars. So when I go and do a pilot with a client and I say, hey, here's 6.6 million, we really work hard to say in this state, if I save you 6.6 million, it all has to be one that you can bring back. Just have noise or a false
Could you
positive.
maybe explain what exactly was in the Doge dataset for people who
So
hasn't
the
gone through it?
Doge data set release was basically the patterns of spending and what usually were the billing codes that were being done by almost every provider, doctor, dentist, home care in the country. And the idea around that data set was that if you applied outlier analysis, you could immediately see things that stick out like a sore thumb, right? Like, hey, these are the hotspots where we are seeing a lot of issues. So, for example, one of the issues that has been in the news has been the cases in Minnesota with behavioral care. We did one of our pilot where we handled behavioral care, and it was a very interesting solution because there's a lot of fraud in it. Some people use it as quasi daycare, you know, because you have a kid that is autistic, they have to get care after school and then someone just comes in and bills them for 8 hours. So there's a lot of that where if the parent isn't at home and the plan it's being covered by a commercial plan, hey,
Okay.
people are
So
going to abuse the system.